Today, we journey across three front lines, where waves, fear, and the human spirit are shaping the fate of an entire conflict. Part 1. Crimea's water crisis. A strategic reservoir dying before our eyes this spring. The monitoring data from the Taigan reservoir in Belogorsk, Crimea, began flashing red. The water line on the graph didn't follow its usual seasonal rhythm. It plunged, as if someone had snapped the clock's hands in half. Now, standing on its shores, you no longer see a vast sheet of shimmering blue. Instead, cracked mudflats stretch before you, dotted with weeds and dried algae. The gentle lap of waves has been replaced by the smell of mud and the drone of mosquitoes. Taigan, once one of the peninsula's most important sources of fresh water, is turning into an open, dying swamp. The causes are not singular. Prolonged drought. Since the start of the year, rainfall has been far below the multi-year average, and the rivers feeding the reservoir have withered. Extreme heat. Summer arrived early, pushing temperatures high and accelerating evaporation. Siltation. Each year sediment builds up on the lakebed, shrinking usable capacity. The shallower the water, the faster it heats and the faster it vanishes. This sets off a domino effect. Fish lose their food sources and waterfowl lose their nesting grounds. The microclimate around the reservoir dries out. Soils lose moisture, crops wither, groundwater levels drop, wells run dry, and farmers abandon their fields. The political decisions speak volumes. Since June, Russia has stopped releasing water from Taigan into the Byakorasu River. There simply isn't enough to share. Belogorsk Reservoir, one of the few still relatively full, has also closed its gates, switching to strategic storage mode for southeastern Crimea. But these are only stopgap measures. By late spring, many Crimea reservoirs were in similar straits. Moscow declared a natural disaster in 8 districts. Residents have begun to leave, fearing shortages. Some voices, bolder than most, even suggest that if the crisis drags on, Russia might face a painful choice: cling to Crimea despite the crushing scarcity, or hand it back to Ukraine to cut its losses. Part 2. Putin's fear. The shadow of Wagner. If Crimea's thirst is a physical pain, Moscow's torment is psychological, and its name is Wagner. Russian analyst Vladimir Auchkin doesn't mince words. What keeps Putin awake at night isn't the casualty lists from Ukraine. It is the ghost of a Prigozhin-style mutiny. In June 2023, thousands of Wagner mercenaries, heavily armed, thundered toward the capital. The sight of armored convoys racing down the M4 highway rattled Russia's entire security apparatus. A deep crack in what had seemed an impregnable wall of power, Auchkin warns. If the war in Ukraine ends, the risk of disillusioned armed forces turning their sights on Moscow will be even greater. Putin has locked himself into a system in which he too is a hostage. The besieged fortress mentality. Constant propaganda that Russia is surrounded by hostile powers, forcing unity through fear, ruled by intimidation, state terror and political repression to smother dissent. Blaming outsiders for economic collapse, shielding the Kremlin from accountability. If Putin turns the wheel and withdraws, he could face a force even more formidable than Wagner, and this time the FSB would not be able to stop it. The only path he sees is forward. Escalate the war, keep the enemies everywhere narrative alive, and justify his own grip on power at all costs. Part 3. On Ukraine's Frontline 32. Russian soldiers lay down their arms while Crimea lines run dry, and the Kremlin drowns in its own fears. Cracks are beginning to show in the will to fight. In one settlement, Ukraine's 425th Skala Battalion captured 32 Russian soldiers. There was no drawn-out firefight. When they realized resistance was futile, the troops dropped their weapons and raised their hands. In interrogation, they admitted they had been forced into service, regretted their decision, and thanked Ukrainian forces for sparing their lives and treating them humanely. This event shows, in many Russian units, morale is no longer unified. Such surrenders, when publicized, can ripple through other formations, especially those hastily mobilized, poorly trained, and lacking the will to hold the line. 3 stories, one squeeze. These tales, seemingly separate, are in fact 3 tightening vices. Environmental. Crimea's water scarcity erodes its ability to sustain its people and its logistics. Political. The fear of mutiny keeps the Kremlin locked on an escalatory course. Psychological. Fractures in combat morale weaken the military from within. When all 3 converge, a war may not end with a single decisive battle, but with small relentless leaks, draining both resources and resolve. War is not only lost to artillery, it can be lost to water, to fear, and to the will to fight. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, share and subscribe, and join me again for our next deep dive into the realities shaping this conflict.
The fighters of the 425th Skala Battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have captured 32 Russian soldiers in one of the settlements. The occupiers, seeing that resistance was futile against the Ukrainian fighters, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The prisoners stated that they had been forced into the Russian army and regretted their decision. The captured occupiers expressed their gratitude to the Ukrainian fighters for sparing their lives and taking them as prisoners.
Лише за один тиждень бійці 425-го полку